Since Tales from the Mos Eisley Cantina was such a moderate success, the next great monster rally to document would logically be Jabba's Palace. How many great stories that setting could produce, right? Well, that number is actually quantifiable, as it turns out. Kevin J. Anderson is back, editing another anthology introducing lore of wildly varying quality into Star Wars Legends canon. Jabba doesn't have his own story, but that's probably a good decision. I like that we never get the inner workings of his mind. It might have been underwhelming. I kept getting tripped up by some basic logic in this one. The story begins as a Jawa sandcrawler investigates a newly crashed ship in the desert. Apparently the ship was transporting a Rancor, and the Rancor got out and killed the crew. It's unclear how this happened. The Rancor isn't a Velociraptor. A Velociraptor isn't even a Velociraptor. It would have been too big to get around the ship, and if the entire crew was dumb enough to get eaten in the hold, surely the ship would have autopiloted itself to land instead of crash. I don't know. The Jawa figures he can get a good finder's fee on the beast from Jabba. Malakili is then brought from the Circus Horrificus to Jabba's, hired by Jabba's lieutenants Bib Fortuna and a Corellian named Bidlo Quirv. They've brought Malakili to be the Rancor Keeper, as they're about to present the beast as a surprise gift. Bidlo Quirv makes history as the first hapless victim to be fed to the Rancor. Once again, this doesn't make much sense to me. I don't understand how Bidlo Quirv got to be Bib Fortuna's main competition for Jabba's second-in-command if he didn't even speak Huttese. The Rancor is then given many challenges, though I noted some pronoun inconsistencies. Sometimes the Rancor is it, other times he. Not asking questions. Anyways, one day Malakili decides to take the Rancor out for a walk in the desert, where they run afoul of some Tusken Raiders and the Rancor eats some banthas. Considering we know the Rancor's eventual fate, I thought it was a nice touch that at least he got a chance to run around and feel free at least once in its life. His life? I don't know. Considering Jabba's insatiable need to challenge the Rancor with more and more difficult opponents, like his standing bounty on a crate dragon, Malakili decides to make arrangements to steal the Rancor and take it somewhere it can roam free, enlisting the help of Lady Valerian, the underwhelming Mos Eisley crime boss you may remember from Tales of the Mos Eisley Cantina. Of course, on the day of Lady Valerian's rescue, another rescue happened, one that ended the Rancor's life and dashed Malakili's hopes. This story does a good job of helping the reader to rethink the Rancor. It made me think about Return of the Jedi and how it spends a small but significant amount of time depicting the sad results of violence in a way I don't think I recall having seen before or since. I think I really love that Rancor. Logic leaps aside, I mostly enjoyed this story, and it sets up a lot of what's coming in the rest of the book, so it's not really skippable, in my opinion. Don't remember Porcellus, Jabba's chef? Me neither, because he wasn't in the movie. Let's think about that for a second. Between the role-playing game sourcebooks, collectible card games, and other ancillary materials that have named and identified basically every character to appear on screen in a Star Wars, no one ever brought this guy up once. But Jabba's fat, so he's got to have a cook, right? Hilarious! We join Porcellus as R2 and 3PO are introduced to the palace. There are rumors that Jabba's becoming suspicious, that his food's being poisoned, and people keep turning up dead. This last bit, the dead bodies turning up everywhere and being discovered by the dimmest Gamorrean guard in the palace, is evidently one of the plots interweaving amongst these stories. So as the story advances, Porcellus falls in love from afar with the newly captured princess, and because of this he makes sure Han and Chewie are well fed while in the dungeons. And though something of a twist ending, Porcellus himself finds his way to the dungeon as well. This story performs a few functions. It introduces more side characters and subplots, gives us a new viewpoint of events we were already quite familiar with. Barbara Hambly does a good job here, though many of the food references are very, very Earth-centric. I'm going to say that this one is not essential unless you want to get the most out of the Palace Murders subplot. Salacious Crumb is barely sentient, so Esther Friesner sets us up with a new character, the academic Melvosh Bloor, so we can spend some time with the Kowakian monkey lizard in his element. Bloor's sneaking around in Jabba's palace looking for Professor Patan, a university colleague who went to the palace to research Jabba. In the darkest depths of the palace, Bloor meets a creature that promises the knowledge he seeks. But who is this creature? It's Salacious Crumb. I remembered this book being better than the previous one, but so far it's just okay. This story wasn't bad, but not amazing. Skippable. For more entertaining Chrome action, check out the Return of the Jedi behind-the-scenes documentary From Star Wars to Jedi, the making of a saga.
Hey, sweetheart, I like your threads. Sorry.
The Sad Tale of the Dancing Girl Ula by Kathy Tyers. We get some insights into where she came from, Ryloth, and how she made it to Jabba's palace before Tuna stole her. What's surprising here is that Ula actually has a chance to escape thanks to an unlikely interaction with a familiar person. Tyers does a great job of piling on the tragedy here, so now I'm bummed. The Whippet's Tale had better be lighter. This one is all about the various plots to take out Jabba, mostly Lady Valerian's efforts to eliminate and using Jaquil, the main character of this story. Claiming to be a former lover of the Lady Valerian, he's wormed his way into Jabba's court, but he's running a plot to slowly poison him. But Jaquil is also being blackmailed, and there's a lot of other plots afoot. This story is essential if you're into the murder plot arc of the story. Jaquil isn't a particularly compelling character on his own, though. The story is mostly about what lurks around the next dark corner. It was okay. For those of you unfamiliar with Legends canon, Mara Jade first appeared in Timothy Zahn's Thrawn trilogy, which I will eventually revisit for the channel. I think maybe next season. Mara Jade is the Emperor's hand. She basically goes out and does whatever Palpatine needs done, like kill Luke Skywalker before he can join forces with his dad. Mara's force-trained by Palpatine himself, and she does not want to let him down. Spoilers, she lets him down. Maybe it stretches credulity to have Mara Jade in this collection, but it works for her character's timeline, so I'll allow it. Sure, she's just off screen, I guess, but having her here doesn't do her character any favors. The short version, Mara Jade has infiltrated Jabba's palace disguised as a dancer named Erica. She screws up a bunch of times and doesn't kill Luke Skywalker at the end. Timothy Zahn's a great writer, and Mara Jade is one of his most enduring characters, despite not yet being picked up by Disney canon. The problem with this story is that because of the nature of the story, she has to fail. And she's already established as being powerful and capable enough that we know that she can't have her mission foiled by all of Jabba's goons. And there's really no way for our heroes to fight her because they're all in Jabba's custody one way or another. So the only thing that can foil her plans is her own incompetence, which is not compelling. I'm sure if Zahn wasn't on deadline, he could have thought of some intricate plot to avoid this, but here we are. Bonus points to the story for bringing in fake human Jabba as a character. Also, you may ask, is Mara Jade visible in Jabba's palace? The answer is no. If you've ever wondered, what if Columbo suffered massive brain damage? Then boy do I have the story for you. Here we follow Gartog, the Gamorrean guard, on his patrol around the palace. He's incredibly dim, even for a Gamorrean, and he doesn't speak in complete sentences, eats packing material as a snack, and he keeps walking into murders. Gartog is the nexus of the murder mystery subplot woven through the book, though he never quite figures out who done it. But sometimes it's about the journey, not the destination. This one was fun, maybe a little broad, but it doesn't overstay its welcome. Effet Mon is one of the better creature designs in Jabba's palace. I kind of regret not ever getting his action figure. Maybe someday. It's probably just a big hunk of plastic that doesn't have any articulation, but I always like the character. Anyway, this is another first-person narrative, which always seems to give me at least a slightly noir vibe. Not much of consequence happens here, except maybe Effet Mon's entire outlook on life changing after encountering Luke Skywalker. He's faced with a difficult decision, one that might alienate him from his oldest friend, Jabba the Hutt. I wish we had more time with the Luke that's in this story. I felt like he spent most of Return of the Jedi swashbuckling, but here he just seemed kind and wise, strong and understanding. The story also gives Jabba more dimension without sacrificing his mercenary character. From what I've seen, Kenneth C. Flint does a lot of military sci-fi, which I haven't gotten around to yet, but I think it made him a good choice to tell this story in particular. We're not quite into Daniel Keyes Moran territory here, but it's definitely one of the better entries in the anthology. Another of my favorite creature designs is Ree-yees, the Grand. I'm very glad they've continued on in Star Wars, showing up in the prequels and elsewhere. It's a wild design, but also pretty close to the realistic at the same time. Anyway, Ree-yees is a drunk with a murder rap and a deal with the Empire to give them Jabba. This is another story that's adjacent to the Palace Murders subplot. The Bomar monks also figure in the story a bit. Overall, I like this one. It was well written and it has some good grand world building. While I'm on record as being a big fan of Max Rebo, and to a lesser extent Droopy McCool, the story kind of bugged me from the start. It was one thing back in Tales from the Mos Eisley Cantina for Figger and Dan and the Modal Nodes, an established popular band in this setting, to find themselves slumming in at the cantina due to circumstances. But more established musicians being contracted specifically to work the cantina? It's similar to the other problem the era of Star Wars had. It's often a very small galaxy where there's only a handful of locations, and the only people who haven't met yet are Lobot and Chief Chirpa. Cy Snoodles does her best to be the brains of the operation, but Droopy and Max are just caricatures here, especially Max. All he's interested in is food, with the disastrous results for the band. But there's also a few cute moments, like one between Max and Princess Leia. If you're enjoying this video, why not buy my book? Flight of the Pangolin is the story of an intrepid group of heroes who decide to exit the solar system over the objections of an isolationist faction. There's actually a lot more going on than that. There's space pirates, a giant spider for no reason, all kinds of other things. Buy it now online wherever you buy books or at our website, www.thepangolinrepublic.com. You can also get fun t-shirts and random other stuff if you want. And if I may dip into spoilerish territory for a moment, this is where the book starts to go off the rails with regard to how many of Jabba's people survive the sail barge explosion. Don't get me wrong, I would prefer the band survive to play another day, but by the end of the book, it's a little ridiculous. This is definitely one of the better stories in the anthology, and it's not just because I'm biased towards the character design. I've always had a fondness for Bib Fortuna. I never had any Star Wars action figures as a little kid, much as I wanted them badly, but somehow I was able to get my hands on a Return of the Jedi puzzle that featured him prominently. Much later, in high school, I drew a picture of him that probably came out better than anything else I've ever done. I'm not a good illustrator. Anyways, all that is to say that I think Bib has a really cool look, and as Jabba's major domo, he's a key character in this book. A lot of the story revolves around his plot to unseat Jabba. The many other plots, 14 by his count, 15 if you add Luke Skywalker's, he allows to go forward as contingency plans, and his relationship with the mysterious Bomar monks. The palace was once a monastery, but criminals eventually took over the upper levels, banishing the monks to the depths. If you're interested in learning more about the monks, and Jabba's palace in general, I recommend The Illustrated Star Wars Universe by Kevin J. Anderson, illustrated by Ralph McQuarrie. Has a very good chapter on Jabba's palace. Anyways, when the monks reach enlightenment, they get their brains removed and put them in a jar, so they can focus on pondering the imponderables. Sometimes, if they want to go for a walk, they put the jar in a robot spider and walks around the palace. You can see one of these in the film briefly. And yes, I have an action figure of it somewhere. There's a scene in the story where Bib Fortuna meets with Luke Skywalker and Mos Eisley, and they try to work out a deal. Bib knows he can help Luke better once Jabba's dead, which, if the events of this book are to be believed, and I will remind you they are no longer canon, one way or another, Jabba was not going to be around much longer. I like this scene because when Luke shows up at Jabba's, I can totally buy the context of the scene as Bib being like, "Whoa, what are you doing here? I haven't killed Jabba yet. I told you to wait." Throughout the story, Bib seems to have an almost force-powered level of intuition, not quite an ability to read thoughts, but at least gauge intentions. I'm not sure I buy that, but whatever, it's fine. I set out not to spoil the outcomes of these stories to the extent possible, but I have to talk about where Bib ends up at the end of this. Like so many characters in this anthology, he should be atoms scattered across the Dune Sea, but somehow he made it out, back to the palace, where the monks who he conspired with and who he planned to double-cross instead double-cross him, take back the palace for themselves, and put Bib's brain in a jar. It's karmic justice, I guess. They brought back Bib Fortuna in episode 1, which they did not have to do. He isn't played by the same actor, looks nothing like him beyond being a white-skinned Twi'lek, and it makes no real sense for him to be such a high-turnover job for that many decades. And then they brought the same guy back in a fat suit so Boba Fett could take over the crime syndicate without any fight at all. How did Disney canon Bib Fortuna survive the sail barge explosion? Why did he allow his Gamorrean guards to waste away to nothing? So yeah, this story was pretty good, but I'm not a fan of Disney Bib, or New Bib, because prequel Bib I'm not a fan of either. This is probably one of the more humorous stories, and one of the more purely science fiction in plot, which is kind of odd coming from a story about some of the toughest dudes in Jabba's employ. Essentially, the story deals with Barada, mechanic for Jabba's sail barge, as he tries to make repairs before taking the barge out to the Sarlacc. During these efforts, he finds the body of Akbuz, the sail barge captain. The Weequay guards, who are all named Weequay, begin an investigation using a Quay, an avatar of their moon god Quay, which is essentially a magic 8-ball. This is, by necessity, one of the shorter stories in the anthology. The inscrutable nature of the magic 8-ball can be funny for only so long. At the Weequay investigations, the story doesn't have much bearing on the palace murders subplot, since the Quay is not very helpful. I had a few continuity problems with this story, which could have been solved with some tighter editing. The thing I found most odd, but certainly plausible, was that in the movie we only see Barada on the skiffs with the prisoners, and then only fleetingly, and the majority of the Weequays we see on screen are also on the skiffs. But the Weequays we follow in this story are on the barge itself, and we stop following Barada before the barge leaves for the Pit of Carcoon. But Barada was supposed to captain the barge since Akbuz was dead. Also, Akbuz was a Weequay, but all the Weequays were called Weequay. Some puzzling choices in an otherwise fun story. Judith and Garfield Reeves-Stevens are legends in sci-fi writing, but I have big problems with the premise of this story. One aspect of the story I didn't have a problem with was the idea that EV-99 was a sadistic torture droid who enjoyed inflicting pain on other droids. In lesser hands, this might not have worked, but the Reeves-Stevenses do a great job of explaining and communicating a premise that is kind of absurd when you think about it. It's not the premise I have a problem with. The premise I have a problem with is that before she got settled in Jabba's palace, EV-99 was the head of security in Cloud City. It's quite the coincidence, of course, which, EV-99 does not buy as a coincidence at all when she discovers the palace guard Tamtel Screech is in fact a disguised Lando Calrissian, there to hunt her down for almost sinking Cloud City during her escape in the opening of the story. My objection to this premise is only that it makes the universe seem tiny. The Star Wars universe is a massive galaxy with thousands of planets. These anthology books are great opportunities to expand the lore, and this is working in the opposite direction. Of course, there's a reason for this, that EV-99 can't imagine that Calrissian would have any other reason to be there than to track her down, when in fact he has no idea she's even there. And even this plot point is questionable. Wouldn't Calrissian at some point in his months of palace guard duties stop in at the droid shop for some reason, or otherwise be made aware of the droid torturing droids in the basement and put two and two together? Overall, the story was well written, but just ignore a lot of dumb plot stuff that were probably the result of poor editing. Tessic is another old favorite from the puzzle. Old Squidhead has a pretty good story, as it turns out. Did you know he was an accountant? The story positions Tessic as kind of a good guy, even if he's planning on blowing up Jabba and the local Imperial prefect at the same time. And he shoots a Bomar monk in cold blood. But he plans on divesting Jabba's criminal pursuits to his local rival, Lady Valerian, and Tessic will take over the legitimate businesses. He's a good guy, really. He does recognize the Rebel Alliance as a force that Jabba should not be messing with, even helping our heroes briefly during the sail barge battle. I won't spoil the ending, but his fate is the same as many other characters in this book, except this is actually a happy ending for him. We get some lore about the Quarren here, and their feud with the Mon Calamari neighbors, and more insights into the palace murders subplot. I like this one. It's well written and doesn't overstay its welcome. And I'm a fan of Tessic, just as a character design. Speaking of short stories, Bubo! Everyone loves Bubo. Actually, he doesn't have much of a fan following, does he? How come a cult hasn't sprung around him like Gonk? They do give him the spine on the cover art, so that's something at least. There's Bubo. The denizens of Jabba's palace think Bubo's an animal, just some kind of frog dog, but he's actually intelligent, and he hangs out with the Bomar monks sometimes. This story is kind of a sequel to ree-yees' story, so it's kind of important from that perspective. It's a short bit of fun. One could argue that Danik Jericho, the snot vampire, the assassin obsessed with drinking the brain matter of his victims, doesn't appear in Return of the Jedi. But by his nature, he keeps a low profile, so I guess I'll allow it. He's still after Han Solo's soup, and Jabba's, and Leia's, and Lando's, and Luke's, but in the moment settles for lesser soup, leaving the bodies around to freak people out. So much great soup on the line, he really starts to lose it. This is pretty much the same deal as Jericho's story back in Tales of the Mos Eisley Cantina. Atmospheric, spooky, maybe a little more desperate this time. I think the first-person stories are maybe the most effective for these anthology books. My big question here, and I see this as another issue for the editor, this guy loves eating brain soup, but at no point is he remotely interested in the smorgasbord of brains in jars in the basement of the building. He can detect Han Solo's soup while he's in carbonite, but he can't tell there are, conservatively, dozens of brains in jars downstairs. Brains idly walking around on spider legs that he must have noticed at some point. Maybe they're too easy targets, but surely some enlightened monk brain juice would be tasty to this guy. Drinking brain soup is his whole deal. It's jars of it right there. Just another first-person story, told from the viewpoint of a folksy local skiff guard assigned to Boba Fett for the trip out to the Sarlacc pit. The guard tells the story of his sister Shara, who ended up in the pit while attempting to escape from some bad news stormtroopers, is there any other kind, and lived to tell the tale. Let's just ignore the fact that in the movie Boba Fett is on the sail barge until he jetpacks over to the skiffs when all hell breaks loose, because that would ruin the entire premise of this story. This was another short one, but fun, well-paced, since the next tale is Boba Fett's adventures in the Sarlacc pit. An aside, while I think Tamira Morrison is just generally fantastic, I've lived for too long with the voice of Jason Wingreen as Boba Fett, so I can't read his dialogue in the New Zealand accent that is the current reality. I just can't. I'm stuck in a pre-2002 reality on this, which is fine since the book is stuck here too, so just so you understand the context of my experience.
He's no good to me dead.
What if he doesn't survive? He's worth a lot to me. Put Captain Solo in the cargo hold.
The story was released under the pseudonym J.D. Montgomery, after creative differences with Lucasfilm prevented Daniel Keyes Moran from writing the story he envisioned. He planned to have Boba Fett spend years in the Sarlacc, but was told he could only be there for a couple of days. He also wanted the Sarlacc to demonstrate intelligence, but had to give the role over to one of Fett's fellow captives, the mildly telepathic Susejo of Choi. I definitely think that these mandated changes hamper the story a bit, and in this read-through, I felt like there were moments where I felt like Fett's voice isn't quite right, like during the flashback to his negotiation with Jabba. The interludes with some of the Sarlacc's other victims were really interesting, though. It's hard to know where Moran ends and Anderson begins, hence the pseudonym. It's still a fascinating read, and for sure one of the better stories in the anthology, but one wonders how much more successful an uncompromised version would have been. Look, that's what she's called in the end credits. I'm actually surprised she's in the credits, since she's got no dialogue. The actress must have a good agent. The character's name is actually Yarna Del Gargan. She's an Eskagian, and this story really wants you to understand that she has 6 breasts, and she's only that size because she retains water easily, and Jabba likes her to be very jiggly because it reminds him of his mother. Here we follow Yarna and Sergeant Dolan, one of Jabba's guards. Possibly this guy? As they make their escape from the palace and the chaos following Jabba's death. It's a nice little romance story, punctuated by the threat of multiple types of assault and a cameo appearance by a krayt dragon. A.C. Crispin is another legendary sci-fi author, especially in the realm of licensed works, and she does her usual excellent work here. But there's not a lot to say about it. It's a nice, soft ending to what is an otherwise eventful book. The book also contains an epilogue listing the eventual fate of the characters. One thing that always bothered me about this anthology was that so many characters survived. Sure, some of them get their brains put in jars, but really anyone we saw on the sail barge should be dead, dead, dead.
Dead, 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 dead.
And I say this as one of the biggest Max Rebo stands on the planet. Dead. So, yet another very mixed bag. But I think the high points are high enough to warrant a read by Star Wars fans, especially if you're at all invested in the old Legends canon. It doesn't reach the highs of the Cantina book, but it's still worth a look if you're curious.
Edgar, what'd you bring me to a place like this for? Look at all these freaks around here. It's really disgusting. That one over there, I don't even know what it is. Can't tell what's the head and what's the tail. Ugh. And that Jabba guy, old Big J as we call him around here, well, he's the worst of all.